Here in the WCNC Plus Live Impact News Studio, I am WCNC Charlotte Sports Director Nick Carboni, and I am pleased to be joined today by a Charlottean and Sports Illustrated legend himself, Larry Keith, who is back in Charlotte the last handful of years, and he's got a new book out, and we're going to show it to you right here. It is called Touch 'Em All, My Life and Career at Sports Illustrated. Larry, everybody probably asks, why now? Why write the book now? Of all the, I can't even, countless words you've written over the decades, why write this many more for this book?
Well, this is actually a rewrite in a sense. I did a first version called Me by Me at the insistence of my daughter and wife. And a few people read it, just a few, and they said, you know, if you take out a lot of the personal stuff and play up the business related stuff, you might have a real book. And so I hope have a real book.
And I want to make sure I know where we can find it. Amazon, anywhere else. Park Road Shopping Center has the bookstore there too.
Park Road Books.
Yep.
They very much want me to mention Park Road Books.
Well, I do enjoy stopping in there, so that's where I will get my copy.
It's a terrific bookstore. It really is.
You know, it's so interesting how your career intertwined with Carolina basketball so much, being a fan yourself and an alum. But I want to bring you back to Charlotte and those formative years. I know you spent a few years at UNC Charlotte. I'm curious, as we see what Charlotte is as a sports town now, what were some of your favorite memories and moments of sports in Charlotte during those years when you were growing up?
That's a great question, because I have very fond memories. Charlotte as a sports town then was nothing like it is now. I would go to the Charlotte Coliseum for an Eastern Hockey League game. I would go to Griffith Park for a Class A Sally League game. I would go to the Coliseum also for college basketball. That was a big event at the Charlotte Coliseum, the old, now still standing Charlotte Coliseum. My dad was in broadcasting, and he did a lot of sports, and so he brought me along some of the events he covered. So I was indoctrinated into sports at a very early age.
I've heard about some of those NCAA tournament, right, at the Coliseum. They had some big ones there, regionals and such.
They did. But also Carolina would play. They had the North-South doubleheader. It was a great time for college basketball, because in the late 60s is when Carolina really got it going. Duke had been good, NC State had been good, and Carolina joined the party when Dean took his first team to the Final Four in '67.
Covering Dean Smith as a student reporter, what was that experience like in those kind of, obviously we all know what he became and the legend that he cast over the program and the ACC through the 90s, but back then in the late 60s, what was that like?
He had been to one Final Four in '67, and in the spring of '67, and I became sports editor of the Daily Tar Heel in the fall of '67, and I got an interview with him, and I used the name of Ron Green, who had been my boss when I was interning at the Charlotte News. He was a columnist at the News. He later became a columnist at the Observer. Ron was so well respected that it was a good entree. And I remember I still remember to this day, sitting in Dean's office, interviewing him about the coming '67-'68 season. He was very gracious, and in point of fact, we developed a very nice relationship, because my junior year I was sports editor of the Tar Heel. My senior year I was sports director of the town radio station. I did a Dean Smith show before and after every game. And then I went on to Sports Illustrated, and I covered college basketball.
Well, you covered college basketball, and there's the iconic cover, the high step and heels, Dean Smith's his high stepping heels. And, if you know anything about that team, you'll notice somebody's missing. So why is Michael Jordan not in this picture, Larry?
Oh, you've got all the good ones. Michael Jordan had sat in the high school McDonald's All-Star game the previous spring, the all-time scoring record. He was coming to Carolina, and he was a dead solid cinch to be the fifth starter. I, at that point, am the college basketball editor, and I call Dean and tell him what our plans are. Dean, we want you and all five starters, the four returnees, and Michael Jordan. And he he said, "Well, you may know Michael Jordan is going to be the fifth starter, but he hasn't proven himself defensively yet." Well, I was taken aback, but we had an ace in the hole, and the ace in the hole was the guy who was going to take the photo for the cover had actually gone to school many years before with Dean Smith. He was a student at Kansas and was also the team photographer. And I said, well, Rich Clarkson, call Dean and talk your old school buddy into letting you take the picture. Well, none of that worked. Of course, when the season begins, Michael Jordan is in the starting lineup. In fact, I think he hits the first basket of the season. He certainly hit the last most important basket of the season when he won the national championship for Carolina.
Yeah, he'd be on a few sports. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there's a PS to this story. When I retire from Sports Illustrated, my colleagues get Dean to sign the Sportsman of the Year cover that he had received when he retired in 1997. And on that cover, he writes, "Larry, apologies for not letting you include Michael Jordan on the cover back in 1981.
He'd be on a few Sports Illustrated covers after that, Larry. I have to know, you had the unique perspective of covering Michael Jordan or Mike Jordan before he became a global icon. What is it like to know a global icon before they become a global icon? How do you process that through your career?
Well, because he was a North Carolina kid, we were familiar with him in high school. He did extremely well, as I said, McDonald's All-Star game. When he went to Carolina, it was an excellent team. It was a team that had James Worthy. So not all that much was expected of him. He grew in his capability and his talent. By the time he was a sophomore, it was pretty clear that he was a spectacular player. So the rush to greatness that Michael Jordan had seemed sudden, but you could see it developing all along.
Talking to Larry Keith, who lives in back in Charlotte, grew up here, a longtime Sports Illustrated writer and editor, has a book out now, Touch 'Em All, My Life and Career at Sports Illustrated. You can get that book at Park Road Books. Larry, I think 19 cover stories, and correct me if I'm wrong there.
That's right on the button. Thank you. Yes, 19 covers.
So, the beautiful thing about Sports Illustrated, especially in your era, was not just the story and the written word, but those cover stories, and that art was so important. Do you have any, besides the one we just heard, are there any that come to mind of where you had an idea and somebody was difficult or something didn't go or something happened by accident? Like, what comes to mind when it comes to how some of those came together?
Well, the Final Fours that I covered when Duke lost to Kentucky in '78 and Magic Johnson, Michigan State beat Indiana State, Larry Bird in '79. Those were guaranteed to be on the cover.
Right.
I did some spring training rookie stories that were planned for the cover. Kirk Gibson, who of course had his great moment against Oakland in the World Series, hitting a home run. Some were just a result of the news. I was on paternity leave when Tom Seaver was traded from the Mets to the Cincinnati. I was enjoying being at home with my wife and helping with the new kid, etc. We had a new substitute managing editor that week because the old one was on vacation. The new one came down from the 34th floor, which is where all the company's senior executives dwelled. And he said, I want to do a story on the Mets trading Tom Seaver, and I want Larry Keith to write the story. Well, Larry Keith wasn't really ready for that, but he was called into action. And I was able to stay at home, and we sent reporters out to Cincinnati to interview Tom Seaver. I was fortunate in that regard. Another memorable cover that I did was on, well, Reggie Jackson, when he had first joined the Yankees. I caught up with him in the Yankee clubhouse and trying to get his attention, and he ignored me. And then I dropped the name Sports Illustrated, Reggie, Larry Keith of Sports Illustrated. He turned on a dime, put his arm around me, walked me into the trainer's room, which of course is off limits to the press. And that's when we began to do the interview. Later, after the game, we went to the airport. I'm flying out with the team to the next stop. We walk onto the plane. He tells some poor guy to get out of the seat, that he needs two seats. He said, for me and my Sports Illustrated guy. So I was the Sports Illustrated guy. So stories like that come to mind. They're fond memories.
That is a great segue to my next question, Larry, because, okay, you're on the team plane, you're sitting next to Reggie. I believe his straw that stirs the drink quote came from him at a bar.
That was a Sport magazine. Exactly. That was a Sport magazine article that came out before the season started. Yeah. I'm now doing a SI cover story as the season is starting.
So the access to these players was different. What was the access like to even some of the best and biggest, brightest sports stars in the world at that time?
You know, Sports Illustrated was a foghorn. Players were different then. They weren't surrounded by PR people. There was a team PR guy, but the team PR guy was delighted to have Sports Illustrated come and do a story on one of his star players, and whatever the sport was. So generally speaking, the athletes themselves were very, very accessible. That is not the case today. I remember when I did a Magic Johnson cover at the beginning of his sophomore year, not at the end when he won the national championship, but he and I and his girlfriend, soon to be his wife, still his wife, we went out to dinner together. I remember being in the living room of Mike Schmidt when I did a cover story on him. It was very, very different. Advantageous to me as a writer, disadvantageous today to the few sports writers that still exist.
Yeah. You know, when people ask me like about the different names, Panthers and Hornets and bigger names, what they're like to be around, I often think about the people they don't know about that I've enjoyed telling their stories. Who are some of the people that we may not know? You know, you talk about Reggie Jackson and Mike Schmidt and Magic Johnson. What stories come to mind when maybe you uncovered something you didn't know before, or somebody?
Well, you know, this was a cover story, but it was a cover story on a young man for the Chicago White Sox who really had very little chance of making the team. But it was a story about somebody's almost impossible task. The young man's name is Harry Chappis. He was 5 feet 6 inches tall. He was trying to unseat the player manager at shortstop, Don Kessinger. He had very little chance of making the team, but we did a cover story on what it was like to try to overcome all of those odds, and he wound up in the minor leagues as one might have expected. The cover of Sports Illustrated was a very rare prized piece of real estate. It was usually reserved for the biggest names, the hottest topics, whatever was big in the sports world. And that's where I found myself spending most of my time.
When you wrote this book, what perspective did it give you on a life and a career?
How lucky I was, how fortunate I was. There were so many. Getting to Sports Illustrated was my hope, my dream, even my plan. But the plan wasn't working out very well, which is why I took my first job that I took while I was in school was to work for the Associated Press. I had done some stringing for them, and then I got a call. That job was going to pay $128 a week. a local radio man, John Kilgo, called and offered me a job for $175 a week and the chance to drive a gold Camaro with Big Ways News written on the side. Well, that's where I seemed to be heading. I had tried and failed to get an interview at Sports Illustrated, but two great pieces of luck occurred almost simultaneously. I got a call from Curry Kirkpatrick, Carolina 65. I'd met him and known him when he would come back to Chapel Hill when I was still there. And he said, "Hey, are you still interested in coming to work at Sports Illustrated?" And I said, "Well, of course I am. Absolutely." I had tried and failed to have an interview before. He said, "Well, expect a phone call." Well, the second coincidence was that I had not had the first interview because I wouldn't fly to New York at my own expense. I couldn't afford it. But this time, the radio station was flying me to collect award. I had won a national headliner club award. So fate won the award. Fate put me in New York. And when Kirkpatrick said, "Are you interested?" I said, "Not only am I interested, but I'll be able to take a bus from Atlantic City, where the award was being presented, into Manhattan for the interview." I did get the call to ask me to come up for an interview. I did, and 3 or 4 days later, I got the offer.
All right, Larry.
Go ahead. Then it was the struggle with all the terrific writers on staff to make it to staff writer and senior editor and so forth.
Can't let you go without asking if the Heels are going to the Final Four this year.
You know, they look very promising so far, don't they? I love the big man. I love the freshman. I hate the fact that Seth Trimble is out. He was always a favorite. They weren't expected to go to the Final Four the first year of Hubert Davis. We can't really say they're expected this year, but they're certainly off to a great start. Based on what I've seen so far, the win over Kansas, I'd say they have a shot.
All right, Larry Keith, new book, Touch 'Em All, My Life and Career at Sports Illustrated, just chock full of stories and of the athletes that you've covered and the great moments that you've covered, especially college basketball in North Carolina. So we appreciate you coming on. And once again, you can get Touch 'Em All right now at Park Road Books. I see Joe Poznansky on the cover there. He's got some great books there as well. So Larry, thanks for joining us.
Yes, he does. Well, this has been terrific. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks for coming on. This was fun.